Thank you for tuning in. This is a daily report for Tuesday, January 25th here in Korea. Omicron has emerged as the dominant strain on the local front as well. And as clear proof of this reality, Korea's daily tally has hit an all-time high today. I have Kwon-so standing by with the latest here and elsewhere. So do start us off.
Sunny, let's get straight to that record high figure that Korea has posted this Tuesday. 8,571 infections were tallied as of 12 a.m. And that's the first time that Korea has surpassed 8,000 infections in a day. And that is also the highest ever number in domestic transmissions, while there has been a drop in imported cases from the day before. Now, the majority of the nation has been posting upticks here in the country, with some even seeing all-time highs like Gyeonggi-do province as well as Incheon. And if we go over to the general figures here, in the past week, there's been an increase by around 1,000 cases from the day before, and compared to last Tuesday, the figure has roughly doubled in this span. Now, moving over to the total number of caseloads, that's now closely approaching 750,000, and moving over to the number of patients that are currently in severe or critical condition, there is a development here, a positive one, as this number has dropped to below 400. On to our vaccination figures. We've got close to 87% of the nation who got their first shot and 85.4% who got their second one. And also now close to 50% of the nation's population have received an additional or booster shot. Moving over to the global figures, there's been 2.9 million new infections reported in the span of a day, with some 7,800 new fatalities. And also some countries have made milestones in their accumulated caseloads. Italy hit 10 million and Spain 9 million in the past day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
Right, so thank you for the global tallies over the past 24 hours. Now for more coverage on the local COVID-19 situation, today I have Shin Yeon here in the studio. Yeon, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Sunny.
Right, so as Soa mentioned, Omicron appears to have pushed our daily tally to a new high. Tell us more.
That's right. So ever since the Omicron variant became Korea's dominant strain, taking up more than half of all new infections nationwide, the country has witnessed a flurry of outbreaks. Regions like Honam, Gyeongbuk, and Gangwon have been hit particularly hard. 8 out of 10 infections in Korea's southwestern Honam region were Omicron cases, and Omicron accounted for 70% of all new infections in Gyeongsangbuk-do province, whereas in Gangwon-do province, this number stood at nearly 60%. And the variant has also triggered a string of cluster infections in the greater Seoul area. It's responsible for nearly 90% of all cases in the city of Pyeongtaek in Gyeonggi-do province, and is spreading rapidly after a mass outbreak at a U.S. military base and a nursing home. At a briefing on Monday, KDCA Commissioner Chung Eun-kyung encouraged people to get their boosters, citing local data that showed the effectiveness of extra jabs against the Omicron variant. Take a listen to what she said.
We've seen how many neutralizing antibodies one could build after getting a booster shot or a third extra jab. It turns out a booster shot can increase antibodies against Omicron by up to 100 times.
Right, and along with calls for booster shots, I understand the government that is looking to transition into an Omicron response posture, Yeon.
That's right, Sunny. Korea is set to launch a new set of prevention guidelines on Wednesday that have been specifically drawn up to curb the spread of Omicron. Making the most efficient use of our limited medical resources will be the primary focus of these new measures. And COVID-19 screening centers will only conduct PCR testing on high-risk groups and those with a suspected infection. Everyone else will have to test themselves using rapid antigen test kits. And this will definitely speed up the process at testing centers with shorter lines. And now the latest measure will first kick off in Gwangju, Jeollanam-do province, and the cities of Pyeongtaek and Ansong in Gyeonggi-do province starting on Wednesday. And the government is planning to expand these testing protocols nationwide as early as the end of this month or early February.
Right. Now, Yeon, the timing of this latest rebound is also causing much concern given the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday, right?
Right, you're absolutely right. We're approaching the Lunar New Year holiday this weekend. And on Monday, Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum asked the nation's people to cancel any plans to visit their relatives or travel to their hometowns in light of our current situation. He warned that cross-country travel and mass gatherings over the long weekend could add more fuel to the crisis.
A number of times, the government has asked that you connect with your families from a distance, saying one last time or just this once. But we have seen how movement across the country at major holidays can worsen the COVID-19 situation.
He added those who must travel are strongly recommended to get a booster shot and get tested for COVID-19 before moving about. He also advised people to wear masks that are certified with at least KF80 or higher.
Right. Yeah, and thank you for now, but do stay with us for more talks. Right, up next, I have Swa back at the desk with the latest remarks by officials here regarding Korea's COVID-19 situation. Swa, welcome back.
Hi again, Sunny.
Right then, do begin with the most recent government assessment of our current outbreak.
Well, first off, health officials say that the rise in infections will be inevitable for the time being as the Omicron variant is outnumbering the Delta strain. But the government has highlighted some significant improvement as well, namely a lower chance of developing serious illnesses and death thanks to rising booster shots. Now, patients aged 60 and above account for just a little over 7% of cases, with close to 85% of senior citizens having received a booster shot. Among the 392 patients currently in severe or critical condition, those aged 60 and above accounted for 78%, which also is an improvement for that particular age group. However, officials noted that children aged under 18 make up close to a third of total COVID-19 cases. In terms of medical capacity, less than 19% of close to 2,300 hospital beds for severely or critically ill patients are in operation. However, to deal with potential increase in demand due to the Omicron variant, the government is expected to expand these beds further. For now, according to an official, up to 1,500 patients in severe or critical condition can be treated.
Right, I see. And so I hear there's been some changes in strategy with regard to home treatment.
Right, Sunny. Home treatment will also be tailored to the Omicron variant. So Park Kyang, an official at the Health Ministry this Tuesday at the briefing, said that the proportion of home recovery is expected to grow along with the growing figures of Omicron cases. And because that is likely to lead to less severe cases and increase in asymptomatic patients or those with light symptoms. Already some 32,000 people are being treated or are recovering from home, with 5,789 patients having been designated for home treatment on Tuesday alone, which is roughly 70% of the daily caseload on that day. As part of a more efficient systemization, starting Wednesday, the government will reduce monitoring from 2 to 3 times a day to 1 or 2 times, which includes checking through an application as well as through calls, and that depending on the severity of the patient's condition. This is expected to more efficiently utilize the workload of home treatment monitoring staff, but officials stress that if the patient needs extra consultation, a 24-hour management system will be available too. And also a big change will be the shortening of the mandatory isolation period of COVID-19 patients from 10 to 7 days, as Yeon mentioned earlier. So that will also apply to those people being treated at home. And to give you some specifics on that, it's 7 days for vaccinated people, completely vaccinated, while unvaccinated people are asked to voluntarily quarantine for an additional 3 days, however, with no monitoring, so no GPS tracking, for instance. And here's an explanation from one of the officials at the government briefing earlier in the day.
We were confident in making this change because around 5 million people in Korea have been in quarantine at some point, and they've cooperated very well with our guidelines, with violation of self-isolation rules only occurring at a rate of 0.1%. This change in our policy is a sign that we trust the nation's people to spend the 3 days exercising caution on their own accord, like staying at home and following strict hygiene, even without separate monitoring from local authorities.
Right, I see. And so what about the quarantine guideline for those who've come into close contact with COVID-19 patients?
Sunny, that's also going to be shortened from 10 to 7 days. And close contact is defined as when a person, for instance, had a talk with someone within 2 meters for at least 15 minutes. But there will be also some people that will be exempt from isolation if they are completely vaccinated, meaning they have not surpassed 90 days after having received their second shot.
Right. One more question, so before we expand our talks to include Yeon. I hear there have been calls for blood donation amid an apparent shortage in supplies. Tell us more.
Right, Sunny, that seems to be the case as the government asked for the nation's public to donate blood to secure enough supply before and after the Lunar New Year holidays. As of Monday, the nation had enough blood supply to last 4.1 days. That means the alert level for blood reserves stands at caution, which applies when blood can be supplied between 3 and 5 days. Citizens were asked to participate in the blood donation campaign by going to their nearest blood bank and make reservations, which also can be done online. Meanwhile, an official explained that people who got vaccinated can donate their blood after 7 days and COVID-19 patients 4 weeks after having been treated.
So roughly about a month then. Now, while Omicron has started to make its presence felt here in the local front, in quite a number of countries, Yeon, it has started talk, that is, about Omicron becoming endemic. For more on these prospects, Yeon, tell us a bit about the countries that are witnessing a decline in Omicron-related infections.
Right. If we take the United States, for example, they've seen the number of new infections go down. Its 7-day average in the past week dropped to around 690,000 from 800,000. Then that was recorded some 2 weeks ago. And daily COVID-19 infections in the once Omicron-stricken UK have also halved in the last 2 weeks. England is lifting its Plan B restrictions this week and preparing to live with COVID-19 as if it were the seasonal flu.
And on top of that, the UK is also expected to open travel to all arrivals from February 11th and is also mulling over whether to get rid of mandatory vaccinations for medical staff. So that appears to be all in line with the country gradually handling the coronavirus like an endemic or the flu.
Right. And what is Korea's stance with regard to prospects of the pandemic becoming endemic, Yoon?
Well, the Korean government hasn't given a straight answer yet. They said it's difficult to tell because there aren't any clear indicators to suggest that Omicron will be the start of an endemic phase in the outbreak. But Son Young-rae, senior health official, said one thing should be clear, that it's not ideal to see a huge uptick in cases followed by sharp plunge like in the US and the UK.
지금 한국에서의 목표는
We value quality over time. We are trying to prevent as many deaths and critically ill patients from going to the hospital rather than containing the Omicron variant in a short period of time.
He added this may work with Korea's exceptionally high vaccination rates. Take a listen.
우리나라는 그 나라들의
We have high vaccination rates compared to other countries. Of course, not every vaccinated person generates immunity against Omicron, but higher vaccination rates will increase the chances of us containing the spread of Omicron and eventually bringing down the COVID-19 figures.
And experts also said it's important that Korea finds its own way of gauging the situation to determine whether it has entered the endemic stage rather than applying indicators used abroad. One doctor told Yonhap News Agency that unlike the US and UK, where many unvaccinated people obtained immunity through mass outbreaks, Korea might see its COVID-19 situation deteriorate because of its comparatively few case counts.
Right, which is nearing 750,000, as you mentioned. So now I believe the global health body, well, the head of the global health body, has also warned against rampant optimism with regard to prospects of an endemic, right?
Right, Sunny. It was actually WHO officials, maybe more individual officials, that have actually suggested the scenario that the Omicron variant might be the last threat to the current pandemic. But the latest remark by the Director General of the organization said that the pandemic can play out in various ways. Let's take a listen.
It's dangerous to assume that Omicron will be the last variant or that we are in the end game. On the contrary, globally, the conditions are ideal for more variants to emerge. To change the course of the pandemic, we must change the conditions that are driving it.
And with that change in conditions, Ghebreyesus was also referring to the target of vaccinated 70% of each nation in the world. And if that's achieved, he also hinted that the acute phase of the pandemic can be brought to an end by the end of this year.
Right, a cautious stance right there. So thank you very much for the coverage. Yeon, also thank you. See you on Wednesday.
Thank you so much.
In our headlines at this hour, the Biden administration is weighing the option of sending U.S. military to Eastern Europe amid fears, that is, of looming Russian invasion of Ukraine. Our Lee Kyung-won reports.
The U.S. is putting 8,500 troops on high alert ahead of a potential deployment to Europe if needed, amid rising fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Pentagon on Monday said the measure is at the direction of President Joe Biden. But Press Secretary John Kirby said no final decisions have been made on deployments and that no troops are intended for deployment to Ukraine itself.
And no mission has been assigned to these troops. No deployment orders have been sent to them. What the Secretary has ordered them to do is to be ready to go.
The deployment to Europe, he says, would happen when NATO activates its rapid response force or if other situations develop referring to an invasion. The NATO response force is a multinational force totaling about 40,000 troops. This is in line with what was discussed during a video call between Biden and European allies to reinforce security on NATO's eastern flank.
We have been consulting with allies in deployments and refining plans for all scenarios. In fact, we've never ruled out the option of providing additional assistance in advance of an invasion.
NATO has already begun bolstering its deterrence, with member states like Denmark, France, and Spain deploying troops and ships to join their forces in Eastern Europe. The Kremlin, which has been denying any plan to invade, denounced NATO's latest movements, blaming U.S. and NATO for escalating tensions by distributing misinformation. Russia has massed an estimated 100,000 troops near Ukraine's border, demanding NATO promise to ban Ukraine from joining its alliance, something the West has not agreed to while warning of serious consequences if there is an invasion. It remains to be seen whether a breakthrough can be reached at the upcoming four-way meeting between officials from Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany in Paris on Wednesday. Lee Kyung-won, Arirang News.
Back here in the country, there have been some favorable findings on the economic front. Korea managed to secure its growth target of 4% last year. Ji-young has more.
Last year, according to the Bank of Korea, the South Korean economy grew at the fastest pace in 11 years. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday that the country's gross domestic product adjusted for inflation grew at 4%, which is in line with the BOK's forecast. It's a rebound from the negative growth of 0.9% seen the year before, which supports the BOK's continuing move away from its emergency stimulus measures. Exports, which were the mainstay of economic growth in 2021, rose by almost 10% on-year. Another main driver was an on-year rise in private spending of 3.6%. The new data for Q4 of last year show that the recovery remained on track, expanding by 1.1% from the quarter before. This was the sixth straight quarter of growth, again supported by strong export demand and a pickup in consumption. Exports increased by 4.3% on quarter, led by semiconductors, coal, and petroleum products. Spending in the private sector increased by 1.7% in Q4 on quarter, led by restaurants and lodging, which got a boost from a temporary easing of the distancing rules before the start of Omicron. Commenting on last year's growth in a social media post, Finance Minister Hong Nam-ki stressed that South Korea has achieved the fastest and strongest economic recovery among the G20 member countries. Hong noted that Korea was able to minimize the contraction in 2020 and return to strong growth in the pandemic's second year, a sign, he said, of the Korean economy's undeniable strength in times of crisis. 엄지영, Arirang News.
On the labor front, employment of female workers here in Korea has more or less recovered to pre-pandemic levels. This is according to findings for last year, which also show women in their 20s led the recovery process. Here's Min Soo-kyun.
More females in South Korea were employed last year compared to before the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, the employment rate for women recovered to near pre-pandemic levels, according to the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family on Tuesday. The number of women in jobs stood at 11.7 million in 2021, up 202,000 from the previous year. In other words, the employment rate for women last year was 57.7%, pretty close to the 57.8% recorded in 2019 before the pandemic began. The rise was mostly attributed to women in their 20s. Last year, the employment rate for those aged 20 to 29 was 59.6%, up almost 3 percentage points from a year before. The figure is slightly higher than in 2019. In terms of numbers, a total of 1.9 million women in their 20s were employed last year, up 87,000 from a year earlier. But the ministry raised concerns over their job security, as around half of the jobs were regular employments, while the remaining half were temporary posts. Meanwhile, the employment rate for women in their 30s remained low. In particular, the employment rate for women aged 35 to 39 dropped 1.1 percentage points to 57.5%. The ministry explained this was likely because many women were compelled to take care of their children amid the pandemic, making it difficult for them to return to work. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
And the pandemic appears to have had little impact on the popularity of Korea's entertainment contents overseas. Recent industry findings show a remarkable export performance. Our Han Sung-woo explains.
The pandemic has not stopped South Korea's content industry from expanding its now global reach. According to the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, the nation's exports of content like music, movies, and games rose in 2020 by 16.3% compared to the year before, to almost $11.9 billion. Quite a performance considering exports overall in that period saw a 5.5% decline. By sector, gaming accounted for the majority of those exports at nearly $8.2 billion, followed by animated characters at $715 million and broadcast content at close to $700. Music, including K-pop, came in at 5th place at close to $680 million. Including the Korean market, the content industry saw sales rise in 2020 by 1.2% to $107.4 billion. The pandemic boosted sales in gaming and cartoons, but it hurt sales in the film sector, which plummeted 53%. Sales also fell in the music industry. With these declines, the number of businesses in the content industry fell by 4.4%, and the number of people they employ dropped by 5.9%. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Burkina Faso's army said Monday that it has successfully ousted President Roch Kabore, suspended the constitution, dissolved the government and the National Assembly, while also closing the country's borders. The announcement was made on state television, where the lieutenant colonel in charge noted the takeover had been carried out without violence. The latest statement was also made in the name of a previously unheard of entity, the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, or MPSR, its French language acronym. It said it would propose a calendar for a return to constitutional order after consultations with various groups in the country. The latest coup came after shootings erupted at army camps on Sunday, with soldiers demanding more support for their fight against Islamist militants. A rare snowstorm in Greece swept through the country on Monday, closing schools, roads, and shutting down transport. Schools are to remain closed until Tuesday, with classes taking place online, while public service employees were advised to leave work at noon. Firefighters received calls from people trapped in their cars. Meanwhile, heavy snowfall slammed Istanbul as well, with authorities halting all flights at Istanbul airport for an hour on Monday. Turkey's disaster and emergency authorities said thousands were stranded due to the adverse weather, as many parts of Turkey have been hit with heavy snowfall since the weekend. Our fans in the UK are getting excited as Thomas Gainsborough's 18th century painting, The Blue Boy, goes on show at London's National Gallery 100 years after it was bought and shipped from Britain to the US. The portrait of a young boy dressed in blue is widely regarded as one of the most famous paintings by Gainsborough and arguably one of the most famous British works of art. The painting is on loan from the California-based Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens. 이승재, Arirang News.
Come next Tuesday, Korea marks its third Lunar New Year amid COVID-19, and there is a special place here that is seeking to offer some semblance of the festive occasion, albeit within prevention guidelines. I have Chun Song-cho standing by. Song-cho, welcome.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
So where are you greeting us from?
Well, we have the Lunar New Year holiday coming up soon, right? So I wanted to take you to a little time travel with me today. Here, Minsokcheon in Yongin, just an hour drive south of the capital. I mean, look around this place. This place is amazing. Look at this ancient architecture, and the village is so peaceful. It's a folk village. And then as I was walking up to this point, I saw all the staff members were dressed in hanbok, traditional Korean clothes. So I will show you a closer look, give you a great example of how all the buildings here looks like. So look at this 장독대. This is giant jars where people in the olden days, during the Joseon dynasty, used to store fermented food like gochujang and 간장. And this is like chogajib with thatch roof over here where commoners used to live. And then this kiwa roof over here. Obviously, this is where the owner of the house used to live, maybe aristocrats. So yes, this place looks like it's been plucked right out of Joseon dynasty, and that's exactly what this village was designed for people to travel back in time to the country's dynastic days. And that is why this place is still very popular for filming, for a number of dramas and movies. And this place is spread out over some 29,000 square meters of land, big enough to recreate dynasty-era life through both architecture and atmosphere. So you see other types of buildings as well, like Sewon and Seodang, which were the traditional educational institutions. Buddhist temples are here too, and Kwana are here too, provincial government offices. So those buildings have been either relocated from various regions around Korea or meticulously restored based on the findings of a thorough survey conducted around the country. But it's not just the buildings. I mean, here you can see what kind of furniture people used back at home, what kind of equipment they used for farming, and what kind of clothes and accessories they wore. I mean, it's like you can take an in-depth, hands-on history lesson right here. Then there are lively performances such as tightrope walking, mask dances, and traditional wedding ceremony reenactments. So you can watch a variety of age-old performances. No wonder this place is still very much popular to tourists and locals alike after 50 years of operation. And so here, each season, they come up with different types of performances in accordance with the changing environment and weather. So this winter, let's see what they have in store for us. Oh, do you see the people over there? I think they're dressed in special outfits. I guess a hunter and a rabbit? Oh, you see a rabbit over there too. So let's ask some questions. 안녕하세요.
네, 예, 안녕하세요.
여기서 지금 뭐 하고 계시는지 여쭤봐도 될까요?
네, 저 여기서 사냥꾼입니다. 사냥꾼인데 여기 이제 토끼를 잡으려고 준비 중입니다.
Okay, so he's very much in character right now. So he said he's a hunter who lives in this folk village, and he's getting prepared to hunt the rabbit over there. 그럼 지금 뭐 하시는 거예요?
이게 이제 활인데
네.
활 가지고 이렇게 토끼를 잡을 때 연습을 해야 돼가지고.
Okay, so he's going to teach me how to hunt with a bow here, do some practice, archery practice. 네, 지금 가르쳐 주시겠어요?
일단 한번 보여드릴게요. 이렇게 해가지고 이렇게.
Wow, so he's going to show us how. Oh, okay.
이게 생긴 것 때문에
Right on the spot.
오해를 봤는데. 동작 그만. 저거.
It's like watching Tom and Jerry.
내가 이래서 잡으려고 그러는 거예요.
So this is why he wants to catch that rabbit over there.
정리해 놓으면 흐트러뜨리고 정리해 놓으면 흐트러뜨리고 얘 자꾸 이래가 일로 와.
The rabbit always gets in the way. This is so funny. 그러면 제가 한번 해봐도 될까요?
네, 이거
네.
하는 방법 가르쳐 드릴게요.
네네.
어렵지 않으니까.
Okay,
여기,
so he's teaching me right now.
여기 이렇게 잡으시고
네.
구멍에 이렇게 넣어서
네네.
요걸 낍니다.
네. So place the arrow into the hole over here and then you draw the.
그다음에 여기를 자꾸 당기는 게 훨씬 더 잘 나가요.
알겠습니다. 한번 해볼게요.
해보시겠어요?
Okay, I'm gonna give it a try.
세 개, 잡아.
All right, so put the arrow into the right place.
기다리죠.
왜요?
내가 여기 이거형 토끼인데 팁을 하나 드려. 팁.
So the rabbit is gonna give me a tip. 네.
사냥꾼 만년 사냥꾼이지. 그러니까 이게 팁이 뭐냐면은 쏠 때 혹시 남편이나 남자친구 있어? 아니
없는데요.
없어. 그러면은 가장 미워하는 사람 한 명 있지.
네.
미워하는 사람을 여기 얼굴 미워하는 사람 얼굴로 생각하고 이 미간을 꽂아버리는 거래.
알겠습니다. So the tip is to imagine a person that you hate the most. Okay, so let me give it a try. All right.
쏘죠.
Oh, that was very close. Oh, that was very close.
사냥꾼에 관심 없어.
Yeah, maybe I could be a hunter in the future. 그럼 좀 다른 것도 보여드릴 수 있으세요?
이제 이렇게 하면 사냥을 하면
네네.
동물을 잡지 않소.
네.
이제 먹어야 되니까
네.
우리 불을 피워야 돼요.
So after hunting, you need fire to cook those meat, right?
저걸 언젠가 한번 매달아야 되는데. 저 토끼가.
Okay, so you can split some firewood over here to make the fire. 그러면 한번 보여주시겠어요?
그렇죠. 내가 이게 또
Place the log.
굉장히 어려운 일이라서
네네네.
네, 이거 한번 보셔야 돼.
네. So place the log over here. 장갑을 끼고.
왜냐하면
그다음에
위험해요.
이거. So look at the X over here.
이게 우리 좋은 도끼야.
네. 좀 빨리 보여주실 수 있으세요? 지금 빨리 보여.
토끼를 잡아 또.
하나, 둘. 우와! 네, 감사합니다. 아니요, 근데 지금 저는 못할 것 같아요. 너무 무섭네요. Alright, so maybe I can give it a try after reporting, after finishing.
나중에 한번 오세요.
감사합니다. 감사합니다. Alright, so the culture, the history, and tradition of 19th century Korea are alive and well here at Minsokcheon. If you were born in the year of tiger, if you are a foreigner, or if you just finished taking the college entrance exam, then you will be eligible for a discount. But what you also have to remember is that a party bigger than 6 people will not be allowed altogether to enter the premises because of the current social distancing protocols. This has been Jeon Sung-cho reporting live from Minsokcheon, and back to Sunny in the studio.
All right, Sung-cho, thank you very much for the taste of tradition. Omicron has become the dominant strain here in Korea, and there are growing calls for a prompt transition into an Omicron-tailored response posture. For more, I have Professor David Kwak from Suncheon University. Professor Kwak, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
I also have Professor Lee-Hoon Sang from Yonsei University. It's been a while, Professor. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you for having me today.
Right, Professor Kwak, in a matter of slightly more than 50 days since its first detection here in the local front, Omicron has become the dominant strain. What are your thoughts on the speed of its spread here in the local front?
Well, it obviously shows the great speed at which the Omicron is transmitting. But I also feel that the reason why we see a quicker than expected rise in the numbers is probably because we probably had Omicron cases before its detection. So as I've said numerous times, I do believe that the number might have grown domestically without being detected from the officials. So it is rising much quicker. But I also think that we're not clearly in the zone to see a huge spike yet, because these numbers are set to double in 2 to 3 days. We're hitting about 50-something% today. So in about 2 to 3 days, maybe then is when we're going to see a huge spike in the numbers. So we should probably brace ourselves for that.
Right, and talking about a huge spike in cases, Professor Lee, some are predicting that after next year's Lunar New Year holiday, Korea's daily tally will hit as high as 50,000. What are your thoughts on this? And what are your thoughts also on perhaps when Omicron will peak here on the local front?
Actually, also in Japan, after some holiday season period, they have experienced a spike, which has gone up quite high, much more than Korea right now. So I think after this Lunar New Year season, where many of the people will be traveling and there will be many of people's gathering, so we probably will be experiencing some spike. But when the peak will be coming, I think it really depends on how fast the daily number increase happens. So if it happens very quickly, like many other countries such as South Africa and other countries, maybe within a month, maybe we will see the peak. But if the increase comes somewhat slowly, then maybe the time of the peak might comes a little bit later than that.
Right, I see. Well, over in England, health authorities there believe the worst of the Omicron wave is over, and a host of prevention guidelines are looking to be eased in the days ahead. For more on the situation there, I have David Cox live on the line. David, it's good to have you back on.
Thank you, Sana. It's good to be on the show.
Right, so I hear Omicron cases there are on a decline. Tell us more.
Yes, so Omicron cases are down definitely compared to the start of January, which is great. So we've now got around 80,000 a day compared to 200,000 a day right at the start of January. So a big drop. And the real key is that fatalities and hospitalization admissions are also considerably down too. But as we know, Sani, there is always uncertainty in this pandemic, as you don't know quite what's coming next. So there is also a new variant, which some people have dubbed stealth Omicron, which is thought to be even more infectious. And in the past few days, there's been lots of a number of cases of this, and some people are a little bit concerned because in Denmark this has already overtaken Omicron to become the dominant variant. So scientists in the UK are monitoring that one at the moment.
Right, I see. And meanwhile, David, how is the medical arena there explaining the drop in Omicron infections, and what is its response to talk about the pandemic becoming endemic?
Well, so this is the thing. So scientists do think that Omicron is milder than Delta, but also the big reason why we're seeing this drop in cases is simply just because of the effects of vaccines. So many people already have immunity to the virus. So Omicron in many ways seems to be similar to the original strain of COVID, which emerged 2 years ago. But just because of the vaccines, the antivirals, everything we have to fight it, it's not proving as deadly as the first strain did. But a lot of people do now believe that COVID is now endemic, so it's here to stay. But at the same time, that does not mean that COVID is benign. We will probably still see continue to see more variants emerge, which could cause outbreaks from time to time. So we need vaccines to go to more parts of the world, and we need to actually invest in vaccines which protect against a broader range of variants really going forwards.
Right, an important fact right there. Professor Kwok, what are your thoughts meanwhile about COVID-19 moving toward an endemic state?
Well, I think Mr. Cox made a very good point of view here when he said that there's a certain uncertainty about the whole COVID-19 situation. The thing about Omicron that we're sort of feeling excited about is the fact that it's so transmissible. Excuse me. It's so transmissible that once it sweeps through the nation and the whole globe, for that matter, it's going to create a global immunity against SARS-CoV-2 as a whole. But there's also the chance that, because we are not currently certain of how lingering or how long the immunity we would receive from Omicron will last, because we have experienced it very shortly so far. And as Mr. Cox already mentioned, if variants were to occur, we are not entirely certain how much of an immunity this Omicron could provide us against a newly appearing variant. Obviously, I'm staying hopeful that it'll be long enough that once and for all, it'll reduce the numbers of further transmission. But in my personal view, looking forward, I think vaccines and treatment regimens still needs to be researched and implemented quite heavily, because there are also proofs that vaccinations given either prior or after natural immunity, meaning infection, would create 40 times stronger immunity. So if we go through Omicron as the whole nation and even be vaccinated afterwards, I think it'll create a strong, almost superhuman power of immunity that we will be kind of worry-free for quite a long time to come afterwards. But at this state, there are still uncertainties remaining even with the Omicron variant, so we should be careful not to completely loosen ourselves because of the less of the severity that we're seeing from the Omicron.
Right, but despite the uncertainties, David, come Thursday, face mask and vaccine pass requirements will be lifted in England, and come February 11th, as my colleague Soa mentioned, the COVID-19 testing requirement for fully vaccinated travellers to England will also be lifted. What is the public response to this?
I mean, I think the majority of the public are keen to get back to normal, as I think all of us are right now. There is still some resistance in some parts of the population to the rules being relaxed, but I think this is mainly from doctors and nurses unions who are concerned about the impact of relaxing restrictions on healthcare systems, and also from charities supporting vulnerable groups of the population. But I think the majority of the people are just very happy to try and hopefully get back to some more of a normal life in the coming months again.
Right. David, some pundits claim the planned ease in COVID-19 restrictions comes in response to public outcry over a number of alleged social gatherings that involve Prime Minister Boris Johnson during the UK's pandemic-related lockdowns. Is there any truth to these claims?
I mean, the story of the Downing Street parties has been the major news story in the UK in the past month. I mean, it's actually probably overtaken Omicron as the dominant news story right here. I mean, so at the moment, as things stand, Boris has signalled his intention to scrap all of the COVID laws by the spring. And politically, the government is banking really heavily on this summer being the most normal summer since 2019, and that helping to change the public mood, because there's a lot of animosity in the UK against the government at the moment. There's not only the crisis over the parties, but also the cost of living is rising very sharply due to inflation right now in the UK. So in reality, the Prime Minister had very little choice to do this, because all of his cabinet, a lot of his MPs have made it very clear they would oppose more restrictions. And with Mr Johnson's leadership on the ropes, it's unlikely he will be able to reintroduce any measures against COVID in the future, even if he wanted to. So it's basically more his own party taking a hardline approach on this to try and gain back political ground, really, in the coming months.
I see. All right, David, as always, thank you very much for making the time to join us live at this very early hour at your end.
Thank you.
Right, Professor Lee, back here in Korea, authorities initially spoke about transitioning to an Omicron response strategy if daily infections exceed 7,000. Now, they're speaking about a transition if daily infections exceed 7,000 on average. How do you respond to this shift in stance?
So I think the government was trying to be very careful and to come up with a figure that which will activate their response. But 7,000 is somewhat of an arbitrary figure. It is not a set number. And actually we need a little bit of time to transit to another phase of the response. But still, there are some of the concern that maybe the government, it would have been great if the government have transited much earlier than current phase. But it just takes time and resource, and a lot of guideline has to be given to local clinic, which later in the another phase of different in the different phase of the COVID-19 response, the local clinic and hospital should be involved in the response, and then also there should be only the severe case will be tested for the RT-PCR testing, but there should be many of the changes that will happen, and readiness will getting things ready will take time. So that's why the government is not putting us a strict number of 7,000, but they are now saying on average of 7,000 per day.
Right. And Professor Kok, what are your thoughts on the timing of this transition into an Omicron-tailored containment strategy?
Well, so I'm hearing that some are worried that it might be too late to transition into this phase. But I disagree with that idea, because I generally agree with what government is currently saying, that the transition we're about to make is to rather loosen up the medical sector's burden, and also loosen up the restrictions that we used to have on this virus alone, so that to only focus on people who are more vulnerable to having the disease more severely. I do agree with that specific idea, because Omicron, at the same time it is being transmitted and it is being infected, is currently known to cause about half to about a fifth of the severity of what the Delta could have caused. So it's both a danger as well as a chance for the nation to gain immunity against SARS-CoV-2 much more at this almost simultaneously, as opposed to having to pick each group of people to be vaccinated and to go through certain phases to receive that sort of immunity. So it's both the chance and the danger we're facing at the same time. In that regard, the government's stance or tactic to really attack this rather more loosely, but focusing heavily on those who are more vulnerable, I completely agree. And for the matter of whether it being too late, I don't think there will be such an issue, because the later it is implemented, it only means that we're being more conservative and more careful. So if we go into this mode more later, it only means that we'll be more focusing very specifically and efficiently on the people who needs the care, as opposed to really generalizing and caring for everybody.
Right. So under this new strategy, Professor E, rapid antigen tests will be actively adopted. And as you mentioned, neighborhood clinics, that is, will offer treatment to those who are being treated at home, offer advice, supervise, etc. What are your thoughts on the efficiency of these measures, and what needs to be done to improve them?
So it is just not possible to test everybody once there are 40 or 50,000 cases per day. So it is important, it is actually necessary to transit into this phase of providing testing for more of the severe cases. But reserve and have the supplementary the simplified testings for less severe cases. But I think the rapid antigen testing is one thing that we should remember is it is kind of a supplementary testing. It is not like finalized confirmed testing. I mean, the specificity and sensitivity is not enough. So even after this testing, the symptoms should be monitored carefully, and then we should just keep in mind the limitation of the testing capacity as well.
Right, and I direct the same question to you, Professor. Professor Kwak, what are your words of advice with regard to these new response measures to Omicron?
Well, I personally feel that we could probably focus more heavily on symptom-based approach to this. So instead of focusing, as I said, only to the people who would be more vulnerable, maybe we could also make a point to really treating or preventing people who are showing up with symptoms. Number two, I also think that there should be an attention made to younger generations currently rising up in their proportion of daily confirmations. As we have seen from foreign countries all around the world, with the Omicron variants and also with Delta variant, actually, those who are not vaccinated or those who are vaccinated less than other generations seem to show up highly in the proportion of the Omicron variant composition. Not only that, there was also a rise in admission of those generations. So we should be very observant, but we should also come up with a better plan to further increase the rate of vaccination among these younger generations, plus the vaccination for booster shots given to the elderly generations and those who would be more vulnerable to the disease.
Right. Professor, Pfizer's Paxlovid, its oral COVID-19 pill, is being prescribed to those aged 60 and above here in the country. Now, there are calls for this age requirement to be further expanded. What are your thoughts?
So the government has actually expanded and lowered the age requirement to the 60s. So basically expanding the possible beneficiary of these treatments. And I think maybe there should be a further consideration to widen the age group because compared to the original previous phase of the COVID-19 outbreak that we have seen in the early period of global COVID-19 pandemic, especially with the emergence of the Delta variants and with this Omicron variants, we are seeing that there are some of the people who are younger than 60-year-old who are also developing severe symptoms for those people who are in their 50s or 40s as well. So, and also we are seeing some of the cases in people developing severe symptoms in the lesser number, but in their 30s or younger as well. So I thought the difficult thing is the medicine had been just recently available in Korea, and then we have limited amount of the pills. So it is we have to be really we have to have a balanced approach. But I think we have to quickly think about the possibility of widening the beneficiary groups.
Right, and Professor Kwak, my final question to you: what are your words of advice with regard to prevention efforts as we look ahead to the Lunar New Year?
Well, let's remember, even though Omicron is rising, we still have Delta going around. So for those people who are not completely vaccinated, they should do so currently. But also those people who haven't been vaccinated still plan to meet their families for the Lunar New Year. They should be extra careful, keep the very strictest social distancing guideline, but Happy New Year.
Right. Professor Kwak, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Lee, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Right, here in Korea, the basic personal measures against the pandemic remain the same. Do watch your distance, wear your face mask, and wash your hands. Thank you for watching. See you on Wednesday.